Is there a magic bullet for core web vitals optimization? My gosh, we think we've come across one today. We're going to be talking about core web vital optimization, page speed insights with Victor Zietermisky here on The Edge.
Go! Your weekly digital marketing trends with industry trend-setting guests. Powered by your digital marketing pioneers, Site Strategics. This week's featured guest is Victor Zietermisky, Chief Technical Officer at WebWim. Now, here's your host, Aaron Sparks.
This is Edge of the Web Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Sparks of Site Strategics. Every week, we're bringing you some amazing guests to talk with and about digital marketing trends as well as key topics to be able to improve your online presence. We unpack a key marketing topic for our digital marketing audience, whether or not you're a freelancer, part of a marketing firm, or a marketing team inside an organization. This show is for you. Check out all the videos over at edgeofthewebradio.com. The show is actually brought to you by our title sponsor, Site Strategics. We're pioneers in the digital marketing space, agile digital marketing to be exact. Core specialties are SEO, technical SEO, content SEO, search engine marketing, social media management and marketing, conversion optimization, and much more. If you're interested in what we can do for you, it's results-based marketing that actually works. Go give us a call at 877-SEO for web or 877-736-4932. Let you know who's coming up on the show. We're going to be talking to Darren Shaw about local SEO, as well as Eli Schwartz about product SEO. We're doing an SEO roundup here. We have been doing that for a while now. So anyway, check out our recent shows with Christina Azarenko as well as Olga Zarshdesna. We actually had some great content we unpacked for our listeners in top tools to be looking at, from Chrome extensions as well as top SEO tools with Olga. If you're interested in being part of the show, info@edgeofthewebradio.com is the email. Pitch us and let us know what you'd like to talk about on the show, and we'll be in contact with you. Set all your reminders on YouTube and to get notified when we drop our videos in that space. Make sure you join the newsletter as well. Text the number 22828, the word Edge Talk. You can join right there. You can also go over to Edge of the Web Radio and sign up. We're sending weekly emails out regarding who we've interviewed, as well as key news topics of the week, and a pro tip here or there. We invite you to be part of the Edge Nation there, free of charge, obviously, just dropping some digital nuggets of gold into your inbox each and every week. Make sure you check out our weekly podcast as well, as we cover all the news of the week with the indomitable Morty Oberstein. And every once in a while, we get a guest in there as well. So check out that on a regular basis, as we're trying to get more information to you as quickly as possible on a regular basis. So we're going to introduce you to Victor Zietermisky. He's a CTO at WebWim in Cambridge. Victor's a founding director of several startup companies based in Cambridge, UK. Hey, we know somebody in Cambridge. That's Andrew Optimizy over there. Victor represents a rare breed of talent to make it on the edge of the web. He's a polymath with distinct depth of knowledge in multiple scientific and mathematical fields. He has a PhD in physics and an academic career with Max Planck Institute in Stuttgart and Oxford University. He's worked in technology consulting cluster for a number of years in Cambridge and has authored a dozen patents for palm rejection in multi-touch displays, measurement technologies for industrial sensors, application of machine learning and patent analysis, and social media user profiling. This is the guy you don't want to actually mess with. His position as CTO has him focused on the analytical study of WordPress ecosystems. Many topics are covered, including hosting, provider selection, page building tools, page caching, and various speed optimization techniques. Technical SEO optimization is at the core of this, especially e-commerce strategy and website security. So Victor caught my attention as we at Site Strategics started to dive into core web vitals optimizations for our clients. We found a specific article that I'll cover here in a moment, but before anything else, let's turn it over to Victor. Victor, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Hello, Aaron, and thank you for having me here.
You're very welcome, sir. Very welcome, sir. And just for our listeners' knowledge, I'll tell you what, you're in for a great surprise here. This is going to be some deep diving in core Web Vitals optimization, but also understanding the tools that are in the ecosystem and how to actually evaluate these. So you're at home. If you're driving, make sure that you replay this podcast whenever you have a moment to write down some of the things that we're talking about, because we're going to unload a lot of science on you here real quick. So with that bio, Victor, why don't you share with us in your own words what we don't know from that bio? How did you come to be on the edge?
Okay. I have been involved in several startups in which we've done a lot of development related to web technologies for some artificial intelligence SaaS platform. And from there, I had a side project in which we start serving people who are doing startups in Cambridge area, and we were doing web development for them. Mm-hmm. And main thing which I probably want to emphasize to help people to understand why Google is playing hardball at the moment. Several years ago, 5-10 years ago, all web development was preliminarily done by professionals. So web designers were not actually at the driving seat when web sites were made. Mm-hmm. But with more and more well-developed content management systems, currently we have a situation when almost all new websites are actually developed using content management systems like WordPress. Mm-hmm. So WordPress is actually quite close to cover 50% of the whole market, but this 50% is for all websites. New projects are predominantly made on WordPress platform, and some probably still will be using competitive platforms, of course, like Shopify, but we were talking mostly about WordPress today, right? Because it's the most flexible platform of them all, and the most difficult one for people to grab at the moment. Because if you are served with Wix or Shopify, you can't do actually much to improve situation for yourself. You're locked with what they can provide to you. And I will explain why they were able to improve situation a little bit, but they're still not the best platform for fast websites. And ironically enough, WordPress can provide you the first look at WordPress can provide you ideas that it can provide the worst platform from the speed point of view and the best platform. Because people who are using WordPress are not actually knowledgeable. A lot of them can actually create very slow websites, which is very difficult to upgrade to fast one. But nevertheless, a lot of people who work in this ecosystem currently have tools to develop very fast websites, and we'll be talking today about these tools and about how people in WordPress ecosystem are approaching this problem. But the problem was created by influx of web designers to the leading seat and lack of knowledge how to drive the car. As a result, a lot of sites become very slow. They become very painful for end users to use, to browse, and especially mobile phones become a pain point for people, because on mobile phone, a lot of slow websites are really very, very slow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Google effectively trying to create some goodwill in the community, trying to force people to take speed seriously. For some years, people were told that speed is an important factor, that if you don't have fast website, your SEO will suffer because people will just not wait enough for content to be presented to them. They will leave your website if it's slow. But Google is trying to structure this better. So Google is trying to enforce a message that nowadays you have to provide fast websites.
Absolutely, absolutely. If I can interject there, I just want to make sure that we tee this up in the manner We're dedicating the show to a full understanding of what we need to know as it applies to the speed of delivery, like you're speaking here. This is the new world of Core Web Vitals, and there's a subject of debate of how impactful it is as a ranking signal, but we're talking about user experience, and it has been ignored. To your point, as there's been just a rush of web development from a aesthetic standpoint, the development, the download, the processing, the rendering for the client has been somewhat ignored, because you're right, the so-called professionals now that are actually developing, they're not coming from a discipline of light development, compressed code, minified code. They're coming from the environment in which you can make a site with a store-bought website that's bloated with JavaScript, bloated with imagery, but it aesthetically is pleasing. And we're going to have part of that as a second segment of really kind of expanding and understanding the role that web developers have in this new ecosystem. But we also want to make sure that this show's for multiple users, for listeners as a website developer, as well as the digital marketer and the business owners that have websites, large and small, that need to understand that they may have gotten a great-looking website, but you may be having such a set of sandbags weighing you down from the user experience standpoint. It doesn't even matter where you rank, people may just bounce off the website. Forgive me, Victor. I just wanted to make sure that we kind of structured this way. So let's tackle Core Web Vitals briefly. Google released a page experience algorithm update near the end of August 2021, but we all know that speed has been a factor for many a year, and that's where you're going with the history of this, correct?
Yes, and I have to emphasize that Google has significant history, looking back, trying to help people to recognize this. And to recognize this problem, they created a tool called Page Speed PCI. So you have Page Speed Insight tool, which can help you to measure some numbers. And these numbers is what Google tried to give you as a tool to evaluate what is going on with your website. This tool is specifically designed by Google to try to help you to evaluate your designers. So if you want to employ some agency, this tool can help you enormously. You can go to the website of the web agency. You can go to some websites in their portfolio. I can use this tool to measure some numbers about the speed performance of websites which this particular agency is capable to develop. So this purpose of this tool, PCI tool, and most speed measurement tools, is to help you to understand how well people are designing their websites and how much JavaScript it's actually will be possible to understand from these discussions that JavaScript is the main problem.
Right.
How JavaScript is actually destroying your speed score.
Absolutely.
These tools are not used by Google outside of this goal. These tools, PCI tools, GTmetrix, and other things, Lighthouse, they were created entirely for helping people to understand reality, to measure something about reality. What is going on with websites, their website, what is going on with the website of their agency, to give them something clear, number, which they can use to evaluate what is going on. Core Web Vitals are a completely different story. And people don't necessarily understand that PCI tools are not Core Web Vital. So score which you measure with PCI tools is a completely different story.
Yeah, Page Speed Insights only measures one particular factor. As Core Web Vitals, we're looking at more than three, but we're dealing with LCP. That's the largest contentful paint. We're dealing with FID, the first input delay, and cumulative layout shift, which is basically the stability of the visual rendering of the site. So you want to expand on the differences there between what we were given with PSI and what Core Web Vitals now is giving us.
Yeah, so only two metrics which you measure with PCI goes into core Web Vitals. LCP, largest contentful paint, is one of them, and CLS, cumulative layout shift, is a second one. So only these two metrics are shared between PCI tools and Web Vitals. In Web Vitals, you have another metric called first input delay, but this metric is rarely a problem, and most websites don't have this metric measured, because this metric is about what happens with your website when user not only visit your website, but then they start interacting with it.
But we do know that JavaScript has been able to be manipulated to affect FID. And we'll talk about that a bit later. Sorry, I'm jumping the shark here. Keep on going, Victor.
Yeah. So this FID, as we will try to explain later, is usually not a problem at all for most websites. CLS, cumulative layout shift, is also can be trouble for particular designer, for particular platform, but usually it's not a big problem. People can fix it. What they really struggle with is LCP, largest contentful paint.
Yes.
This is a real problem for everyone to adjust, real problem to make it work properly. PCI score measure a bunch of other metrics which will tell you about JavaScript. They will measure speed index, they will measure time to interactive, they measure total blocking time, which are not part of Web Vital. We don't know whether they will become a part of Web Vital in the future, and my suggestion is that something like that will become a part of Web Vital.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your prediction would be, and it's evident that Google's not only investing a lot of understanding and a lot of feedback to web developers, but it adopted a dashboard inside of Google Search Console. It's looking at these and reporting these type of metrics from a lab standpoint, and being able to have that as showcased elements inside of its feedback to users is very, very important. And there's been a concerted effort over the last 8 months to truly bring a level of education from the developer side of Google to understand why it's so important. That said, we want to make sure our listeners know what LCP stands for, largest contentful paint. It actually measures the performance, the loading performance of the site. To provide a good user experience, LCP, according to Google, should occur within 2.5 seconds when the page is first starts loading, right? So LCP is how it's actually loading, but also it all should fall under a particular measurement of 2.5 seconds. Is that the full load of the page itself, sir, or just the again, largest contentful paint is just the largest amount of load time for the page, correct?
Yes, and actually for you can see that usually it's loaded before Google decides that LCP is triggered. So for your eye, usually your website load much faster than largest contentful paint reported by the tools. So for some people are talking about the speed for eye and speed for Google. But nevertheless, LCP is not when everything is finished. Everything is finished when JavaScript is fully finished.
Right.
And rendering of picture, which you see immediately on website, is the most important for end user experience.
Right.
And user want to see the picture and start reading content as fast as possible. After that, he can start scrolling, and it's not actually important for end user whether JavaScript is already completely finished. But PCI tools are trying still to measure this thing. Previous generation of Lighthouse tools were actually interested mainly in largest contentful paint event. They were actually giving you more for bringing content to the screen as fast as possible, so that user can start consuming this content. New generation of Lighthouse tools are starting to look more deeply in what you do with JavaScript, because Google understands that the time for hand-coded website is finished, and therefore all websites developed using content management systems are usually overloaded with JavaScript, with heavy libraries like jQuery, and therefore it takes significant amount of resources to process this JavaScript. And what Google, prior to a new generation of PCI tools, were trying to emphasize, it was trying to emphasize that you have to split time between event when you try to render website, creating DOM content and trying to create picture, and the time when you try to process JavaScript. So if you separate in time these two events, you first do picture and then you do your JavaScript, you're a good guy from the point of Google. They were asking you only that about a year ago, and their measurement score in Lighthouse was mainly about whether you try to move JavaScript after the largest contentful paint event or not. It's trying to give you a better view of what you're doing with your JavaScript. It's trying to give you a tool to evaluate different designers, different agencies, and try to tell you whether your website is overbloated with JavaScript or not. So this is the first step people need to understand. PCI tools are much more brutal. They actually don't forgive you if your JavaScript is still bloated.
So let's, Victor, if we could, let's take a step there and pause for our listeners here. Is that we're in a world, like you said, that where 50% of the websites are on the WordPress framework, and the essence of the WordPress environment, it's these snap-on tools, these plugins that come with their own libraries, their own CSS, and their own individual JavaScripts and calls to jQuery and their own sub-jQuery libraries to some degree. All these have their own baggage, and the environment here is not only is the theme laden with additional JavaScripts, but you're having each and every plugin also weigh into that cart of multiple file references, multiple JavaScripts, and JavaScript processing. To say the least, that's a tax on the hosting environment in its own right. So business owners need to understand that their site is built on a framework that is naturally a multiplying effect of these factors that what we had 20 years ago, hand-coded sites, like you said, aren't there. And the nature of the beast is we've moved fast and furious into a space where it's very easy to get functions rendering on a site, but there's a cost. And the scenario is now we have to, I mean, the horse has left the barn, so to speak, on this environment. We are indelibly tied to these multiple applications. Now we have to figure out a way to speed all of them up and kind of consolidate the weight down to a much smaller footprint, right? Yeah, and it's a good news that Google is not brutal. Right. Google is forgiving. Google is telling, for some years, we're trying to tell you, separate your JavaScript and rendering. If you've done it, fantastic. Now with Core Web Vitals, we're giving you a good score. Regardless of whether your JavaScript is still bloated, we are not actually yet trying to force you to change the whole thing. We want actually to check that you've done your homework, which we said you several years ago. We told you, largest contentful paint is the most important parameter. You have to make sure that JavaScript is not actually render blocking. If you've done it, you will be fine. Your Core Web Vitals score will be good, but your PCI score will be bad because you're still guilty with all this bloated JavaScript, which Google doesn't like to see on your website. But it's wrong to take PCI score as a guidance of your Core Web Vital performance. Only one parameter here is important. It's LCP. It's largest contentful paint. From the old reports you get on PCI website, you will have to focus on LCP score. It's the most difficult one on mobile phone, but it's still possible to improve it. And the fact is simple. You have to make sure that JavaScript is not actually render blocking. It's not actually preventing mobile phone to concentrate on task of creating a picture which user can see. Then, after it's done,
you have to process with JavaScript. So if you've done it this way, Google is fine with it. Google is not actually trying yet to teach you that your JavaScript is bloated, you have to do something about it. It's not yet a goal of Google. But PCI tools are trying to focus your attention. You now have new homework to do. You have to do something about this JavaScript. But Google is still marking their previous homework, which is about largest contentful paint. Therefore, people who are trying to look at PCI score and try to improve it to the best possible degree, they're trying to create homework for a future. You have to make sure that LCP score you have in PCI is the best one. And this is enough for now, but you have to know that Google still already set a new homework, and people have to be prepared for the change of the rules in the future.
All right, so we've gotten our homework from Google, and it's a rarity that we say on the show that Google is forgiving. So I appreciate you bringing that to light here. Is that we do need to understand that Google has been informing us here over the years of what to work on and not be brutal as the PCI tools that we have. Although it's great future homework understanding here, we have to move that JavaScript down. We have to move it from the rendering standpoint so we don't block the picture that people are experiencing on the website. Now, JavaScript has a lot of utilization. One of them is menu interaction and interactivity elements. And you have a risk of, if you're moving it too far in the load time, that pages can't render correctly, not from a rendering standpoint, but they can't be interactive. And there's another challenge there, but before anything else, let's talk about, we're in an environment where you can't honestly manually code to the degree on these website builds with WordPress and plugins, because you have all these competing factors. You can't really do what you could years ago by moving things in a particular sequence of events on load time. You have to utilize some additional tools to be able to help manage that sequence of events, right? So we have now caching tools and JavaScript management tools that can be loaded onto a website to be able to organize the sequence of load, correct?
Yes, and if you're using content management systems which are not WordPress, it's not your problem. It's a problem of Shopify,
right,
to do it correctly and to try to move their JavaScript further away in timeline so that LCP time is not suffering at the moment.
That's a very important point. Let's reiterate that again. If you're on a shared system like Shopify or BigCommerce, where you can still execute your own unique templates, but your core load, your core functionality is on a SaaS hosted environment, they do have the obligation and the goal of improving the LCP and the load time of these sites collectively for their users. So for Shopify owners, pay attention to that, because that is what you're paying for and what you're relying on. So watch as Shopify and these other platforms come out with Wix and Web.com, where they're actually improving the entire platform for you over time, because that's their obligation. Duda is also in the space of improving the LCPs as well. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. And I have to emphasize that when you look at the PCI score on this platform, especially mobile PCI score, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible, and they can't actually improve it because they have to have all this bloated JavaScript, and they can't actually remove it.
Right.
But what they do, they improve suddenly, quite significantly, their Web Vital scores, because they were able to just move a little bit further in timeline JavaScript execution to make sure that your CPU on mobile phone can render website first and then start evaluating and parsing JavaScript. They have done it. So for few last months, they have improved their LCP time quite considerably.
Very good.
And people who are sitting on Shopify Wix, they still will be frustrated to look at their PCI score. PCI score will not forget these platforms. it will tell you the truth. These platforms are using overloaded JavaScript. But from the point of view of current Web Vitals, these guys have made their homework. They have done something important for Google. They try to present picture content for end user as fast as possible, and then take care about all the interactivity, about dynamic content and something else. So from the point of Google, if you're sitting on these platforms, of course, you still can do a little bit more.
Sure.
You can take care about image size you put there. You can take care not to do a lot of bloating yourself by using functions which you don't necessarily need, and try to select more lean templates. It's all possible to do to improve your situation if you're using these platforms. But you can't do actually much. You are restricted in what you can do. You rely on platforms which you paid for.
Understood.
On WordPress, situation is very different. On WordPress, it's still your responsibility not to mess with things. And people can easily mess with things on WordPress platform. And therefore, today we will be more talking about this situation for people who use WordPress, because they're much more exposed. They are lonely. They have to understand more than people who are sitting on Shopify.
Very good. And again, that's 50% of the websites that are out there.
There's 50% of websites, and it's a huge majority of all new websites.
And we also, on top of that, I can't begin to fathom the versions of sites that were spun up with WordPress 10 years ago that haven't updated their systems or their framework or their PHP. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion when we talk about server technology. But here's a specific thing, is that we're going to talk about tools that you can use to be able to improve your speed, your LCP, and we're going to cover almost all of these in the second segment, but I did want to park on one in particular and kind of unpack this. We're talking about a battle for speed and web caching. There's an entire new market of these caching tools, these JavaScript management tools for the WordPress environment. And your blog post came to my attention here. The blog post of, it literally was entitled NitroPack Black Hat SEO Speed Optimization. And in this respect, I wanted to unpack, as we set up the JavaScript manipulation and moving rendering of content to the top and not blocking rendering, we wanted to jump into what NitroPack does and what you brought to the world's attention of what they're actually doing. So the scenarios, we are going to give you some great tools to work through, but I mean, the combination, the calculation of coding, caching, and hosting solutions, that's a trifecta of speed. But the blog post that you brought up here, it was not a tepid dive, but a very deep look into what was happening. First and foremost, there's a number of references to field and lab data for core Web Vitals. What are those two factors right there for our audience, field data and lab data?
Okay, so field data, you have Chrome browser. Browser is used not by everyone, but some people do use it. And on mobile phones or Android phones will use Chrome for sure. So in Chrome, you have an option to unsubscribe from telling Google what is going on. But by default, Chrome is able to collect UX report about what you've done when you visited this website, how the browser was processing information when loading your website. And then this report is loaded back to Google servers. It's called Chrome UX report, and people call it crooks. So this report will tell Google about several numbers. And these several numbers, as we discussed at the beginning, the LCP, largest contentful paint, CLS, cumulative layout shift, and feed, its first input delay.
Right.
So these three numbers are measured in the field. They're not measured on Google servers. They're measured on your computer, on your mobile phone, and then report it to Google servers.
Which was brilliant for Google's execution to be able to make us all beta testers of the entire world, to be able to give data back. That's probably the only way to do it, right?
Yeah, and it's the correct way to do it, because then it contains everything. It contains whether using CDN or not, whether using server in United States, but giving this website to people in India or in Europe without CDN, then there will be a consequence. There will be some delays, and these delays will be picked up. So it's a real life field measurement, which tells how quickly people can start consuming information when they click on the link with your website.
Right.
It's an honest and proper attempt to take into account and combine all factors, including how busy is your server, whether your server is able to respond, whether you're using CDN to improve content delivery over the globe, and whether when data are received on your browser, whether it takes significant amount of time to actually show anything to the end user. So they combine it all together in largest contentful paint, and effectively it's your responsibility to try to get it below 2.5 seconds in order to be graded as a good boy by the Google. So this is the most difficult task to do, and JavaScript is the main problem here. Is PCI lab tool is taking this website you provide, and it's parsed by Google server located not very far from where you ask to measure this number. And it's trying to measure this number, but it's not taking into account the time taken to get some response from the server. Initial response time is not included. And it's actually just mainly measuring a lot of information, which nowadays we'll talk about how bloated is your JavaScript.
Understood. That's baseline that we needed to understand here. So you brought you rolled out this blog post to analyze a new player in the field. There's a new solution that's emerged in the middle of 2020 for improving core web vitals, and very, very close to whenever page experience algorithm rolled out. But everybody was talking of core web vitals. There's a young Bulgarian startup called NitroPack, right? So to quote your article here, the NitroPack plugin. Now remember, we were talking about the separation of JavaScript from LCP, making sure that your content's rendering before the JavaScript kicks in there. This plugin fetches all script files and delays all JavaScript evaluations and executions until the first user interaction, such as scrolling or selecting a menu item. NitroPack is using a successful cheating strategy that is not yet caught by Google's field testing tools. So not that the page is loading and JavaScript's delayed, and we know about lazy loading and the different factors that are best standards in a space whenever you don't want to load everything on the entire site, allow the user to scroll down and then be able to execute a new load on an image or a function. But they're literally holding back all execution until there's a menu interaction or a scroll activity of the user. So when it gets down to it, the JavaScript evaluation and parsing are very significant issues here. And you tested a site, RVingwithFamily.com, for this particular test, as well as a separate article that you wrote. NitroPack only serves 12 individual requests and about 400 kilobytes of data. And then you take it over to Google Page Insights or GTmetrix. You saw the same. You saw an enormous amount of file, 143, I think, requests, and I don't see the size of the file at full load, but the difference was incredibly striking. And we here at Site Strategics actually saw the exact same thing on testing. We actually rolled out one, and it was a 60 kilobyte load for the page and one file that was being loaded, and everything was actually loaded up on the NitroPack CDN server, right? Everything did not function until there was an interaction of the user. And if you're running Google Page Speed Insights, right, Everything looks fine. Looks beautiful. You're running Lighthouse. All of a sudden, we have 100% optimization.
Yeah, and again, I try to emphasize from the beginning, it's because PCI tool is trying to tell you how much bloated JavaScript is on your website. And NitroPark has decided just to remove all JavaScript from evaluation. So if you remove all JavaScript, and they actually remove all CSS as well,
right?
Except of inline CSS from evaluation in page speed measurement tools, of course your score will be much better. So of course everyone understands that if all the problem PCI is trying to pick up is about your JavaScript timing, when exactly JavaScript is firing and how much it's delaying the whole thing. You remove all JavaScript and suddenly your site become a champion. Of course,
of course it's going to happen. And if you ran web, forgive me, I just did to color the entire picture here. You ran web page test tools as well, and that showed 46 requests as opposed to the 12 for the same website, including 4 CSS and 32 JavaScript files loaded on the page. And web page test identified the document complete. Even before loading CSS and JavaScript, it marked the these extra 36 CSS and JavaScript files as provided after onload and did not include any other further evaluation of the process because it didn't interact. It couldn't see it. It could see a reference to it, but it didn't load it because it was waiting on a user to interact, and that's not what these testing tools do, right?
Yeah. So these testing tools are not designed for you to try to cheat them. They're designed as a measurement tool for us to try to evaluate our designers.
Exactly.
To try to evaluate whether the designer who is doing your website has done a good job, or whether the agency who is doing web design is doing a good job. So when people like NitroPark are trying to cheat PCI tools, they're effectively trying to create situation when agencies using NitroPark will look very professional and great agencies who know exactly what they're doing.
And yep, there it is. Right there.
It's the opposite. People who are using NitroPark show that they don't know how to optimize JavaScript themselves. They show that they have no idea about speed optimization, and they rather pay to the cheating tool to do the whole thing for some significant money, rather than do professional job in the first place. So be very careful if someone is using NitroPark. If you want to use NitroPark yourself and you decide that this is the best thing to do because it saves you money, fine. But don't be absolutely scared about this story. But you show to the outside world that you're not professional. Because when you look at your website, you will see that all files, most of the files are loaded from Nitro CDN. So it's very easy to understand that you're using NitroPark. It's effectively just written everywhere on your website. It's using NitroPark on the files which are loaded in the system.
So the situation here is that it's basically delaying it's not even loading up JavaScript until interactivity, and on top of that, there's a perceived loss of traffic for users because guess what? One of those JavaScripts is Google Analytics. And if the user is not actually interacting, there's no data about Google Analytics firing at all.
All bounced users are not included in analytics as a result. And people who start using NitroPark, they start to become scared because they see the loss of organic traffic to their website.
Right. Because
all people who bounce back, they were not actually reported in the tool because you don't fire the JavaScript in time to capture these people.
Right.
This actually creates a problem for NitroPark, and now NitroPark is forced to include some JavaScript for exactly this purpose, to try to get reports that these people were actually visiting your website. And as a result, they slow down your LCP time, and some tools which we might discuss later will help you not to slow down in this situation. And NitroPark, therefore, is not an ideal tool, even if you want to cheat system like that with a simple solution. Everyone loves simple solutions. It's not
but the adage "too good to be true" was spoken in this office whenever we affected NitroPack, and it literally took us to 100% across the board. It was amazing. So the deal here is that we understand what they're doing. It was very, very basic. Just a very smart solution, but it's not solving anything. It's basically changing what the measuring would actually be looking at, as opposed to actually having the discipline. It's almost like it's almost like getting liposuction, taking off 40 pounds off my belly, but I'm still carrying it in a cart behind me. That's the ugliest metaphor that I think I've ever actually used on this show. The deal here is these websites download their assets to nitrocdn.com, and if you're new to quote your article, if you're using NitroPack, you're not only cheating Google, but you're screaming about it to the rest of the world, because it can easily be seen that your assets are over on the CDN. So not to be fully negative on NitroPack, we want to make sure that we understand the environment where this has been allowed to grow. Is that Google is paying so much attention to Core Web Vitals and page speed. It was a natural evolution of plugins in the WordPress world to see something like this come to fruition. As well, if you're just going to measure this, let's just move this over here so you don't pay attention to it. Nitro bit back on some of these observations from your article. To quote the CEO of NitroPack, what you're describing is JS and CSS lazy loading, quote unquote. NitroPack offers the first real-world implementation of this that works and yields those fantastic results. Now, WP Rocket and Flying Press are building the same approach after it was proven to work reliably on NitroPack. How would that be black hat if everyone else is following suit? Your argument about that would be?
Okay, first of all, so far, Google was kind enough to the community. They're not actually penalizing you for what exactly you're doing with your JavaScript outside of first render. So if you're not render blocking, Google is saying it's fine. Therefore, from the point of view of Core Web Vitals, Google is not prepared to penalize people who use a NitroPack necessarily, but Google is changing continuously what they're doing, and their ambition is try to force everyone to become much more linear on JavaScript, much more reasonable, and we will explain that it's possible these days on systems like WordPress to create websites which will have 95 score in mobile phone without any cheating. So Google is trying to encourage this new ecosystem of linear and better websites, and they will create a situation where they will actually get further bounty for doing it. So Google at the moment has made first step. There will be next step later. And if at the moment the only thing you can do is to use NitroPack, it's fine. Maybe you're not going to be penalized for another half a year or a year, but be prepared to be penalized because you are cheating. So you are cheating because Google not yet tried to force the next step. The next step will be about what exactly is your JavaScript and how you are doing things with your JavaScript. The first step was just to move the JavaScript outside of the boundary of rendering the first image on your website. Therefore, what NitroPack has done, they've done some step which completely cheated PCI tools and added some complexity to the end user, because end user now will start parsing JavaScript not immediately after images are already shown to him, but only after he will start interacting with the website. And first thing which many people will start to do when interacting with websites, they will press some button or just go to the menu trying to open some another page which they know will be of interest to them. And then when they do it, after 1 second delay, 2 second delay, which will be enough for JavaScript to finish everything, they will not get anything. They will press a button and nothing will happen. Then they will be devastated. In 2 seconds, they will press again and everything will work. And they will be lost. They will not understand what is going on. they might think that on mobile phone, the press was not registered first time, and second time it became registered. So people become confused. They blame their computer, they blame their mobile phone for not being responsive to their first attempt to press a button. But actually, what has happened, you press a button and this triggers a whole parsing of JavaScript and the variation of JavaScript. So before it finishes, you can't actually press it again and do something with this button.
Just think about this. If you get in the car and you decide to start driving the car down the highway, right? And all of a sudden you decide to turn left, and now the car has to figure out immediately, oh, well, let me load up all my other calculations of where else you want to turn before I give you the ability to turn left. And maybe that's a poor analogy, but the fact of the matter is that, yeah, it's not life or death, but the fact of the matter is that you're going to piss off your user if you hide and keep your JavaScript from loading and only wait until they ask for it. And by that time, if they see something not immediately gratifying to go to another function or another interactive element, eventually they're going to bounce out. So your bounce rates right there may actually, I don't know what in the world analytics would show, because you're also holding analytics back. You're doing the antithesis of trying to improve the customer experience or the user experience on your website, which is what this is all about.
Yeah, Google tried to improve user experience.
Right.
So delaying all JavaScript, by the way, it's loaded, but it's not executed. So NitroPack is trying to load all JavaScript, prefetch it, but not use it. So the fact that they are not executing it during the time when user already start looking at content, but haven't yet pressed anything, you have all the time to process everything. And for good user experience, this is exactly what you have to do. You have to start doing everything just maybe in a second, half a second after you have finished everything. On load event, for instance, and 1 second after that, all JavaScript has to start to be parsed. This will be proper step from the user experience point of view, but delaying everything until further user interaction aggregates the problem.
Right.
So the good thing about NitroPack is that if you're desperate and you don't want to learn anything, you can use it. But you will shout about your unprofessional performance to the rest of the world. If you're a small business owner, it may be fine. Because if you're not trying to present yourself as a specialist in web design, and you decide to use NitroPack, maybe it will be fine for now. But be prepared to treat it as a very temporary solution. And also be aware that there are free solutions which will do it more professionally.
Absolutely, absolutely. To finish up this key point here, JWP John from Google Search Console Help Community responded to your article saying it's still very possible to scam people who only look at Lighthouse test numbers. Unlike Page Speed Insights Lab Test, which looks at the page as it loads, the Core Web Vitals Chrome field data takes into account how the page responds as users scroll and navigate the page. It is also not forgiving if visitors who come across the page are not served page content quickly enough due to a remote location, lack of CDN, or high server load. Any tool that tries to outsmart the lab tests will only worsen the result of the field tests. Sure, the client will say, wow, whenever they see the first Lighthouse results, but then they will say when the difference between lab and field is even greater than it might otherwise be because you fudged the static lab results, considering that ultimately it is the end user who's the most important one here. This is similar to the flawed logic behind faking diesel vehicle emission tests. If you want a super fast site, code directly in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Unfortunately, you don't get anything for free here. There is no magic bullet for a quick fix. Period. Right from Google.
Okay, but of course, we have to understand that a lot of people can't change their website quickly.
You got that right.
They will be better off when they redesign their website, when they try to refresh it. They will be better off to use new tools on WordPress, which will make their website to be lean, not bloated with JavaScript. Therefore, they don't need to do as much heavy lifting with other tools like caching plugins to remove the problem. But effectively, they need to understand that even if their website is bloated with JavaScript at the moment, there are options for them to try to consider, and they don't necessarily need to pay money to NitroPack. They can use free options to try to optimize JavaScript delivery for current Web Vitals measurement scheme. So in the article which you cite, I have described several tools which are free and which are trying to do something similar to NitroPack. They either try to make sure that JavaScript evaluation parsing is shifted in time after the onload event in the case of Meteor, or after DOM is ready event for the fast press. And therefore, they can actually improve your LCP score. They can improve your largest contentful paint by taking care that JavaScript is delayed. And how much delayed is under your control. In fast press, they try not to delay it at all. They try to load it immediately after the DOM is ready event and then parse it. And by the time they start parsing it, the onload event is already fired.
Got it.
Therefore, they effectively fire JavaScript immediately after the onload event. But because they don't hide JavaScript execution, the score on PCI will be quite bad because your site is bloated with JavaScript. They don't hide in anything from PCI. PCI is not going to forgive you, but PCI will test LCP number and will tell LCP number. And this LCP number, if it falls below 2.5 seconds on mobile, is only what you need at the moment to get good Web Vital.
At the moment. So let's talk about this. As a reset here, we want to make sure that our listeners actually check out the previous segment of our show as we kind of broke out the entire concept of LCP as well as core Web Vitals and understanding why it's so important to be able to parse JavaScript, be able to delay it a little bit to be able to load up content as quickly as possible. But we do have a number of tools, a number of them that you referenced on your blog article, which we'll have in the show notes regarding NitroPack. You actually unpacked a lot of really good information. There are some caching tools out there that are valuable and free of charge. And if I could have you kind of chime in on a number of these, we want to focus on one that I know is your favorite here at the end here. But have you had experience with I can't even pronounce it. It's auto optimized, but it's it's not two different O's.
Optimizer.
Optimizer.
I think that we have to say that there are two major caching plugins used by many people. BP Rocket is used by 1.5 million people at the moment, and Lightspeed Cache is used by 2.5 million people. So together they cover a significant portion of users who try to improve performance of their website. These plugins are gradually moving into improving situation with LCP. Some of them, like VP Rocket, also include option to delay certain JavaScript either in time by 2 seconds after onload event or by user intervention when users start doing something on your website. So, but they're not trying to offer the option to delay all JavaScript. They're trying to option to delay particular JavaScript. For instance, something related to chat function, which will be at the bottom of your page, or some trackers, something which is not really critical for the interactivity with your website at the very beginning, something which can be done later on. And this capability to try to separate JavaScript, proper lazy loading of JavaScript means that you have to select some JavaScript as a critical one, as the one which has to be there from the very beginning. And then you can try to select the rest of JavaScript as non-critical under the default JavaScript, which will be used later on when people will continue using your content, they will continue using your web page. So if they start scrolling, this JavaScript will be lazy loaded and parsed and executed. This concept of lazy loading by splitting JavaScript into branches is something which is a future in WordPress ecosystem. Try to offer it. But main problem for this to be used is very heavy jQuery library, which is used by most tools, because without the jQuery library, most JavaScript is not going to be executed and parsed properly. Therefore, if you want to do it currently, you don't have good options, of course, despite using new modern page building tools under WordPress, which are not requiring jQuery. So there are modern tools which start to appear in WordPress ecosystem, which will create your website without using jQuery, and therefore will be very fast from the start. And if you will decide to delay some portion of JavaScript, it's not a problem, because there is no heavy jQuery library which need to be there. You can have your one portion of JavaScript, which is not relying on jQuery, to be executed quickly at the beginning to provide all interactivity. And the rest of JavaScript can be moved for delayed execution to be almost like lazy loaded pictures. So it will be called and executed only if you scroll down.
Let's talk about some of those builder platforms for a moment. Though we certainly know of a number in the ecosystem, and some have gone the way of the dodo. But for example, Divi is still heavily reliant on jQuery as a function to render. Correct?
Yes. So most platforms which you used before are actually quite bloated platforms, and they can't actually be saved. New platforms appear these days based on Gutenberg, and Gutenberg is still very early stage itself on WordPress, but there are new ecosystems which are capable to extend current capability of Gutenberg and create full functional page building tools. And the most famous of them at the moment is Cadence. Cadence theme and Cadence blocks are capable to build new fast website for you on WordPress, and it will be compatible with most plugins like WooCommerce and everything else. So you don't actually restrict your functionalities at all. And you can create beautiful designs using this theme and these new tools, but by default, it's not relying on jQuery library. So almost everything will be lightweight and not overbloated. And even if you need to add some functionality which will require jQuery, it can be delayed in time as a loaded JavaScript, because most of what you have to have, your menu system, buttons, they'll be working without any jQuery library.
So you can actually, this is Cadence, correct? Or Cadence?
Yeah, it's a Cadence.
Yeah. So you have that along with additional caching tools and additional tools such as Lightspeed to be able to manage the additional JavaScript load time. You now have an optimal environment of light load of a page builder environment. You have the organization and the manual organization of CSS and JavaScript that you can manually change based on the delay that you want. You can pick the JavaScripts that you actually want to load later. You now have all the tools at your disposal to be able to manage a very fast delivery of content, correct?
Yes, and you can do that on WordPress, and you can do, nowadays you can do fast WordPress, you can do fast WooCommerce on WordPress, you can do much better than it was possible 2 years ago. And Google understands that it will take time for people to utilize such tools to full extent, and more people will start developing fast WordPress websites. But in a year from now, for instance, Google might start actually trying to give bounty to these people who actually decided to switch to this new ecosystem of fast websites made on WordPress, they will expect actually that in a year or two from now, Google will change the vital score strategy and will try to give them some premium for doing what Google wants. Google wants the best possible experience for end user, delivering it. So people have to be aware about this because they can fix with a plaster something at the moment, but they have to be aware that this is a temporary solution and the future will hold them into account if they're not switching to new page building tools.
Victor, I have a question for you. We're talking about the potential reward of Google as it is right now. Google's saying that Core Web Vitals optimization is almost, from a ranking standpoint, a kind of a deal breaker. If they have two equivalent websites, both have the same level of type of traffic and visibility, they'll lean towards a more optimized site if all other factors are relatively the same. Are you saying that, are you predicting that we're going to be in a space 2 years from now where the speed of delivery is going to be a much more premium perspective in the eyes of Google that won't be a deal breaker? It could very well be one of the key pillars of ranking, or at least a ranking signal on its own merit to be able to strive for. Are you thinking in that particular mindset?
Yes, I think that there is too much content on the web. Google has to introduce some spread of metrics to select content better for end user. And of course, the intention of a user who is searching for something is a key factor, and it will be never something irrelevant to Google. It's the most relevant thing is intent, why user is searching for content. But Google intention here is to try to help people who are doing the right things and develop fast websites to get more visibility on the web. And I believe that this intent is going to stay here and will be accelerated and emphasized in the future. And Google can't actually ask people to do something they can't.
Right.
At the moment, these new systems like Cadence theme and Cadence blocks, it's a new thing which just emerged at the end of the last year. More and more people are switching to it. At the moment, about 200,000 websites only are made using these tools. But nevertheless, it's already something which is started. And Google tried to give a leg to this new ecosystem. They try to encourage people to move to this new ecosystem. And of course, Cadence is not alone. Other Genesis Press and Genesis Blocks is a competitive system. Bricks is a new page building tools which will replace Oxygen in the future, which also try to remove jQuery from necessary JavaScript on the platform. People are trying to do something which will help you to score very highly in PCI metrics without any cheating. They want to have situation when the new website made with these new tools will go into PCI lab tests and will do fantastic in the test. And of course, it means that later, Google might try to introduce new metrics in Web Vitals, which will effectively measure the same thing as PCI tools, give you a bounty for the fact that you're doing the right things to improve user experience with fast websites.
Very good. Well, go for a bit of summation here. What should we be looking for in caching tools if we don't have the ability to move and migrate our entire site to a new building platform? And that's a pretty radical thing to consider, especially for companies that have just spent $50,000 on their new web build in an Elementor space. They're going to have to deal with that for a period of time. They're bloated jQuery libraries. What caching tools are really going to be able to help manage the speed of delivery until the time that the ecosystem is friendly enough and the impetus is strong enough to move into these new platforms?
I believe that people have at the moment two great choices. If you are using a Lightspeed web server hosting provider, it means that you have the best caching tools for the future because Lightspeed is doing caching on the server level. Therefore, they can do much more in the caching than any other plugin on WordPress. And they provide a less cache plugin for free. It's just interface between WordPress and LCAS engine, which is built into Lightspeed web server. So this is the most future-proof system, which is improving rapidly, and more people are using it. 2.5 million users are not something small in WordPress environment. And it's a vote of confidence from the community about the future of Lightspeed. And Lightspeed Cache also provides unique feature for speeding up WooCommerce websites by providing integration at the server level of ECI XML strategy to tell effectively to separate on your page some dynamic portion of content, so that the whole page will be constructed by Lightspeed web server from static web page and some dynamic inclusions in your static web page very rapidly, caching everything, caching private cache for individual users as well. And therefore, when you call for your WooCommerce pages, they'll be constructed quite quickly through cache. And Lightspeed Cache is trying to present the best fast solution for WooCommerce owners. And WooCommerce is 4.5 million users on WordPress. Again, not very small community.
No.
So they have to pay attention to Lightspeed Cache. And Lightspeed Cache is doing a lot of recent improvements, integrating very good CDN together with the plugin for free. So you can actually have free ecosystem without paying anything. You can have the best tools to speed up your website. If you're not hosting your website with a Lightspeed web provider, you probably will be fine to select WP Rocket, which is used by 1.5 million users. It's another golden standard in caching tools. Both companies are, of course, trying to do their best to improve citation for their users, to improve Web Vital score and to improve PCI. They use all the recent trends, including capability to try to delay some JavaScript execution as well, to try to bring you better LCP time. But they do complex tasks. They do a lot of things together. And because they're used by so many users, I have to say that you have to look at them more seriously at NitroPack, because NitroPack is trying to grow to their level and finally say if what we've done, this cheating will be not valued by Google anymore. At least we use this time to grow up to the level of big boys and try to be another alternative for you.
Got it.
But NitroPack has integrated very expensive CDN with their service, and therefore they will be never cheap or free. Compared with Lightspeed Cache, which is completely free, they will definitely lose the competition. But you have to understand that caching is not just caching anymore. It's optimization of how assets are organized on your web page. They're preparing these assets in a form which will be easier to download and will be easier for browser to render effectively without being blocked by JavaScript and unnecessary CSS files. So they all work in this direction. NitroPack is not unique in this story. NitroPack is unique only by doing something which completely remove evaluation of JavaScript from PCI tools. And therefore, people, when they look at their score in NitroPack using PCI, they might be impressed without understanding that it's not the whole purpose of a PCI tool.
And it would be easily found out by lab results from Chrome as what it's actually doing. So it really was this trying to present a scorecard on behalf of developers that were using that so they can show to their clients, hey, look at what we've been able to do. And all the while, it's like that traffic cop or that cop that's holding up a hand. Nothing to see here, folks. Look away. Don't look over my JavaScript over here. I'll render it whenever you decide to click a mouse here. So, Victor, to kind of, I appreciate you unpacking everything today and actually going through what it means to actually navigate load time and user experience in 2021 and beyond. We are going to be looking at the future of page speed as a much stronger ranking signal and preferred status, basically, of websites that are embracing speed of delivery. There's a lot of things that businesses should know and adopt, and we would love, if from a purist standpoint, that everybody jumps into better page builders that don't have bloated jQuery and thousands of CSS and JavaScripts to have to navigate. You've given us a lot of tools to actually look at, and on top of that, even web hosting environments to be able to eyeball. And there's a lot of good hosting environments in the ecospace. You actually gave an article about the best UK web hosts for 2021, which was a great analysis of the cloud-based environments they have and a competitive comparison across the board of their RAM, their different processing speeds, and their caching. So we highly recommend our users go check that out. In the UK, you also have international website recommendations as well. So it is coding, it's caching, and hosting as the kind of trifecta that business owners should be aware of when they're dealing with a web development agency. I want to make sure we arm this last moment. Business owners or decision makers, stakeholders in their websites, that they have to look at this as a factor. They just can't look at the glossy aesthetic of a site. They have to look under the hood, so to speak, and know how they're actually presenting content to their audience, because they have to know if they're giving 100%, getting 100% scorecard. It's probably a little bit fudged, right? But they also have an obligation, these stakeholders, to make sure they're doing the right thing or putting things in place for the future. So what kind of guidance would you give business owners and stakeholders? Because they've just heard this, and if they stayed with us, their eyes have rolled back in their heads, they're frothing at their mouth because they don't understand the technology that we're telling them. How do we impart to them the best decisions that they can make to meet your predictive goal there?
Okay, first of all, we need to understand that currently in the market, the difference in the speed of hardware of hosting providers is about 3 times. So the good providers can now serve you with 3 times faster hardware than you probably have at the moment.
Oh, wow.
It's not a small difference, and you have to be aware about it. The time to switch to another hosting provider is up to you, but you have to be aware that new AMD Ryzen Zen 3 servers are really outperforming everything which we have in big hosting providers seen. They provide twice as fast performance than some important names like Vultr or DigitalOcean. And if they coupled with software like Lightspeed web server, which caching everything on the server level, not on WordPress level, they effectively can provide you for free ecosystem supported by Lightspeed, which is like cache and quick cloud CDN. And if you're using tools like Cadence and Cadence blocks, or new page building tool Bricks, which will finally replace Oxygen, you can develop very sophisticated websites which will be very fast if you measure them with PCI tools. And if you're using fast server, fast CDN, and fast new tools, you will get very fast website. So you have this ecosystem at the moment. It's already there. It's changing. And if you use it, if you start using it for new projects, you will be delivering these new projects, which will be very fast without much effort from your side, because you will leverage current existing tools.
It already exists there.
With old sites, you can't actually suddenly rubbish in, rubbish out. You can't actually suddenly replace all the bloated JavaScript with something else. You have to be pragmatic. You have still think about moving to fast server with light speed caching software. It will help you, especially if you're using WooCommerce websites. Even with your current setup, if you move to fast server with the proper software, it will be faster for end user. But you also have to probably take care to maybe delay some JavaScript, which is possible, using some tools which are free. You don't need to use NitroPack, but you have to be cautious not to delay JavaScript to destroy experience of your end users. You have to think about end users first, and then if you can delay certain JavaScript, do it. And they will effectively get better experience as a result. So if you use your current system, you still can improve it, but don't expect to completely change the game and to fantastic scores everywhere in PCI and Web Vitals. But you can improve it for sure. Absolutely. But if you're thinking about starting something new, think about using Cadence, think about using Gutenberg. It will effectively future-proof your new projects. It will make them fast from the beginning, and therefore you don't need to have all this headache which people have trying to think how to improve the speed performance of their Divi website.
Very good, very good. There is the lineup, folks. So you have to pay attention to all the key points that Victor has actually shared with us. So we certainly want to promote your recent article, Victor, over at webwim.co.uk, how to select a WordPress hosting provider. It's in the same discussion of what we're having right now. And also there's a couple other articles, especially how to evaluate your next web development agency with the context of what we're talking about right now. If they're not in the space, if they're not recognizing speed is a critical factor, or more importantly, if they actually roll out some incredible scores, ask them how they got those scores. You might be surprised that NitroPack slipped in there. We certainly would not recommend hiding your JavaScript until somebody makes a move on your website. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. There is no magic bullet for this. It's hard work at the coding level. You've got to be able to work the caching tools that are available for us. But eyeball the next evolution of page building framework that's out there into the future, because you're going to have to make that leap at some point in time. Any final thoughts that we want to give to our audience, Victor?
Don't be scared about what is going on. I think that you still have time to respond, and Google with new Web Vitals is not going to punish you immediately. It will be a gradual process. You have to do it gradually. You don't need to jump and do something in a rush. Be diligent in what you do and think about future, not about today only.
Absolutely. Know your scores, know what you're actually dealing with as well. I mean, the first thing is run your lighthouse, be able to understand your core web vitals, pay attention to those things because it is going to be even more critical as time goes by. Victor, we certainly appreciate your time today, and we want to lift you up. You have some great content going on. Congratulations on everything. As you have such a wealth of information in so many spaces, especially the patents that you're a participant in. So we give you all the kudos in the world there. Certainly lift you up from afar here. Go check out webwim.co.uk and thank you so much for your participation here. It was truly an eye-opening experience of what you told the world, but also what's really happening behind the scenes.
Thanks, Aaron. It was my pleasure.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome. If you want to follow Victor Zietermisky, you want to go over to Facebook, and that is Zhitomirsky, as well as LinkedIn. No Twitter handle, but want to make sure you check him out. Go follow him as he's continually communicating into this space regularly. Go look at the articles over at WebWim as well. It was really neat to be able to unpack that with him today. Be sure to check out the first segment of our Victor of our Victor Zietermisky posted last week. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to Edge of the Web on YouTube. And if you're really interested or feeling up to it today, drop us a quick review on this show on iTunes. Thanks to our sponsors, Site Strategics and Wix. Make sure you check out all the must-see videos and much more over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. Next show, we're going to be have the news of the week as well as Darren Shaw talking about local SEO. So from all of us over at Edge, be safe, be well, and do not be a piece of cyber driftwood. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.